I'm a pilot who accidentally flew over Area 51. The things that chased my plane weren't aircraft. I've been flying civilian aircraft for 12 years, and in all that time, I've never violated restricted airspace. Not once. I'm the kind of pilot who triple-checks coordinates, who files flight plans early, who treats FAA regulations like they're written in stone. My instructor used to joke that I was so by the book that I probably slept with the aviation manual under my pillow. He wasn't far off. That obsessive attention to detail kept me alive through thousands of flight hours, kept my commercial license spotless, kept me employed when other pilots washed out. But on November 3rd, 2024, none of that mattered. Because sometimes the universe doesn't care how careful you are. Sometimes equipment fails, weather turns, and you end up exactly where you're not supposed to be, staring at things that shouldn't exist. My name is Mortis, and I need to tell you what happened in the skies over southern Nevada before they finish what they started, before the headaches get worse and I start forgetting things like the others did. I'm writing this in a motel outside Tonopah, paying cash, using a laptop I bought from a pawn shop. They're looking for me. I know they are. But someone needs to know the truth about what's really flying around out there in the dark. What's been flying around out there for decades while we all looked up at the stars and wondered if we were alone. We're not alone. We never were. And that's so much worse than you can possibly imagine. The flight started normally enough. I was ferrying a Cessna 182 from San Francisco to Albuquerque for a corporate client who'd bought it sight unseen at auction. Simple delivery job, decent pay, the kind of milk run I'd done 100 times before. The weather forecast showed clear skies and light winds all the way across Nevada. Perfect flying conditions. I filed my flight plan, did my pre-flight check with the same meticulous routine I'd performed thousands of times, and took off from Oakland at 7 a.m., planning to make Albuquerque by early afternoon with one fuel stop in Flagstaff. The Cessna handled beautifully, engine purring like a satisfied cat, all systems showing green. I settled into cruise at 9,500 feet, letting the autopilot do most of the work while I monitored instruments and enjoyed the view of the Sierra Nevada sliding past below. Everything stayed perfect until I crossed into Nevada airspace around 9:30 a.m. That's when my GPS started acting strange. The display flickered once, twice, then the coordinates began jumping around like someone was shaking the unit. I switched to my backup GPS on my phone, but it was doing the same thing. Latitude and longitude numbers cycling through impossible positions, placing me simultaneously over the Pacific Ocean and somewhere in Utah. I tapped both screens, thinking it was maybe some kind of interference, but the glitching only got worse. Then my radio started picking up static, a low, crackling hiss that overwhelmed all the normal frequency chatter. I cycled through channels trying to reach anyone, but every frequency was the same, just that steady, rhythmic static that almost sounded like breathing. I checked my compass, the old-fashioned magnetic kind that doesn't rely on satellites or electronics, and felt my stomach drop. The needle was spinning slowly, making lazy circles, completely unable to find north. I was lost. Completely, utterly lost. Somewhere over the Nevada desert with no reliable navigation equipment and no way to contact anyone. The smart thing would have been to immediately turn around, to reverse course and fly west until I hit the Sierra Nevada range again, then follow it back to somewhere I recognized. That's what they teach you in flight school. If you lose navigation, retrace your steps. Don't compound the problem by continuing forward. But I hesitated, thinking maybe the interference was localized. Maybe if I flew another few miles it would clear up and everything would go back to normal. That hesitation cost me everything. Because while I was sitting there debating my options, trying different radio frequencies and slapping my GPS like that would somehow fix it, the Cessna's engine started running rough. Not failing, not sputtering, just running wrong. The RPMs were steady, but the sound changed. Started making this high-pitched whining noise underneath the normal engine roar, like metal grinding against metal in places metal shouldn't be touching. I checked the engine instruments. Oil pressure normal, oil temperature normal, fuel flow normal. Everything on the panel said the engine was fine, but my ears told me different. That whine was getting louder, and now the whole aircraft was vibrating slightly, a tremor I could feel through the control yoke and the seat beneath me. I made my decision then, turned the plane around, pointed the nose west, and started descending to a safer altitude in case the engine decided to quit entirely. I'd find the nearest flat piece of desert if I had to, and put her down there. Better to land in the middle of nowhere and call for help than to wait until the engine seized and I had no choice about where or how I came down. But when I turned west, that's when I saw them. 3 objects in the distance, coming toward me fast. At first, I thought they were other aircraft, maybe military jets from Nellis Air Force Base running exercises. Nevada airspace is full of military traffic, and I figured maybe that was causing my navigation problems, some kind of electronic warfare training that was frying civilian equipment as collateral damage. But as they got closer, I realized these weren't jets, weren't helicopters, weren't anything I'd ever seen before in 12 years of flying. They were roughly triangular, but the proportions were wrong, too flat, too smooth, with no visible wings or engines or control surfaces, no windows or markings or anything that looked like conventional aircraft design. Just three perfectly smooth black triangles moving through the air at speeds that should have been generating sonic booms, but weren't making any sound at all. They closed the distance between us in seconds, moving with a fluidity that defied physics. And then they were right there. One on each side of my plane and one directly behind me, matching my speed and altitude perfectly. I could see them clearly now through my windows. The surfaces weren't painted black. They were black like the absence of light, like looking at holes cut into reality. And the edges weren't sharp like you'd expect on an aircraft. They were fuzzy, indistinct, like my eyes couldn't quite focus on where the object ended and the air began. My radio exploded with sound. Not static anymore, but voices. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all talking at once in a language I didn't recognize. Not English, not Spanish, not any language I'd ever heard. The consonants were too harsh, too sharp, and the vowels too long and modulated in ways human vocal cords couldn't manage. The voices rose and fell in waves, creating harmonics that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. I yanked off my headset, but I could still hear them. Not through the radio anymore, but directly in my head, bypassing my ears entirely and speaking straight into my brain. The closest triangle moved in front of my aircraft, positioning itself maybe 50 feet away, and that's when I saw something that made my blood freeze. There was a symbol on its surface, or maybe the surface was the symbol. It was hard to tell because looking at it made my eyes hurt. The shape was geometric but wrong, angles that added up to more than they should, lines that curved in directions that didn't exist. And the longer I stared at it, the more I felt something looking back at me, not seeing me through cameras or sensors, but aware of me in a way that was intimate and violating. It knew I was there. It knew I was afraid, and something about my fear seemed to interest it. The engine whine increased to a scream. All my instruments went haywire simultaneously. The altimeter spun like a roulette wheel, showing me climbing and descending at impossible rates. The airspeed indicator maxed out at 250 knots, then dropped to 0, then maxed out again. The artificial horizon tilted wildly, even though I could see through my windscreen that I was flying level. And then, the worst thing happened. The controls stopped responding. I pulled back on the yoke, trying to climb away from these things, but nothing happened. The plane continued flying straight and level, as if I wasn't even touching the controls. I pushed forward, pulled back, rolled left, rolled right. The aircraft ignored every input. I was a passenger in my own plane, being flown by something else, being taken somewhere these triangles wanted me to go. And based on the ground below, I knew exactly where that was. I could see it now. The dry lake bed, the long runways, the cluster of buildings and hangars that officially didn't exist. Area 51, Groom Lake, Dreamland, whatever you wanted to call it. I was looking at it from directly above, and I was descending toward it whether I wanted to or not. The voices in my head got louder, more insistent, forming patterns that almost sounded like words. I caught fragments, pieces that my brain tried to translate into concepts I could understand. Witness, see, know, cannot leave, must understand. And underneath those almost words, I felt something else, an emotion that wasn't mine. Curiosity mixed with something like hunger. These things, whatever they were, wanted me to see something, wanted me to know something, and they were bringing me down to ground level to make sure I did. The landing gear deployed on its own, the nose of the Cessna dropping as we descended in a perfect approach pattern toward one of the main runways. I could see vehicles on the ground now, moving rapidly toward my projected landing spot. Military trucks and Humvees, men in uniform scrambling, and something else. More of those triangles, dozens of them, sitting on the tarmac like they belonged there. Like this was their home, and they were just parked, waiting for their next flight. The Cessna touched down smoothly, far smoother than most of my manual landings, and rolled to a stop at the end of the runway. The three triangles that had escorted me settled onto the ground nearby, their lower surfaces touching the concrete without making a sound. Up close, I could see details I'd missed from the air. The black surfaces rippled occasionally, like liquid contained by invisible barriers. Patterns moved across them, the same impossible geometry I'd seen on the symbol, flowing and shifting in ways that made my head pound. And worst of all, I could see things inside them now. Shadows moving beneath the surface, shapes that were roughly humanoid, but wrong in every proportion. Too tall and too thin, with limbs that bent in too many places. The vehicles reached my plane within minutes. Soldiers surrounded the Cessna, weapons drawn, shouting orders I could barely hear through the ringing in my ears. One of them yanked open my door and pulled me out, his face hidden behind a gas mask and ballistic helmet. I stumbled, my legs weak after the terror of the past 20 minutes, and two more soldiers grabbed my arms, holding me upright. A man in civilian clothes approached, older, maybe 60, with gray hair and the kind of face that had seen too much and stopped being surprised by anything. He looked at me, then at the triangles, then back at me, and I saw something in his expression that scared me more than anything else had so far. Recognition, not of me specifically, but of the situation. He'd seen this before. This had happened before. "Let him go," the civilian said quietly, and the soldiers released my arms. "I'm Director Kensington. You've had a very unusual flight, Mr." He paused, waiting for me to fill in the blank. "Mortis?" I managed to say. my voice hoarse and strange to my own ears. My name's Mortis. What the hell just happened? What are those things? Kensington looked at the triangles again, his expression unreadable. Those things have been here longer than we have. Longer than this base. Longer than this country. Probably longer than human civilization. We didn't build them. We didn't crash them. We didn't reverse engineer them. They were just here one day, waiting, and they've been waiting ever since. For what? We're still trying to figure out. He gestured toward one of the nearby buildings, a nondescript hangar that looked like any other military structure. We need to debrief you. Standard procedure for anyone who sees what you've seen. It'll take a few hours, maybe longer, depending on how much you remember and how well you can describe it. After that, he trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. After that what? I asked, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. Kensington met my eyes, and there was something almost like pity in his gaze. After that, we determine whether you're a security risk or an asset. Whether you walk out of here with a very generous non-disclosure agreement and a lifetime of monitoring, or whether you become a permanent resident like some of our other guests who saw too much. The threat was clear, but before I could respond, something changed. The triangles started humming, not audibly, but I could feel it in my chest and in my bones, a vibration that resonated at frequencies my body shouldn't have been able to detect. The symbols on their surfaces began glowing with a pale blue light, and the shadows inside them moved toward the edges, pressing against whatever barriers contained them. Kensington's radio erupted with panicked voices. Sir, we have a situation. Multiple objects are activating across the site. Recommend immediate evacuation of all non-essential personnel. Negative, Kensington said into his radio, his voice calm despite the situation deteriorating around us. We proceed with the intercept protocol. Alert Dr. Chen that we have a witness in custody. He'll want to be here for this. The name Chen made my blood run cold. Dr. Chen, one of the names that conspiracy theorists whispered about in connection with Area 51. One of the scientists supposedly working on recovered alien technology. Except according to Kensington, there was nothing to recover because the triangles had always been here. The blue glow intensified, and I watched in horror as one of the shadows inside the nearest triangle pressed hard against its surface. The liquid-like barrier bulged outward, stretching like rubber, and I could make out details of the shape inside. It wasn't humanoid. I'd been wrong about that. It was something else entirely. Something that my brain kept trying to interpret as human because that was the only reference point I had. But the longer I looked, the more I saw that it was utterly alien. It had appendages, but they weren't arms or legs. They were more like tentacles or cables, dozens of them, each one splitting into smaller branches that ended in structures that might have been hands or might have been something completely different. The central mass was roughly cylindrical but segmented, with each segment rotating independently. And where the head should have been, there was just a cluster of what looked like eyes. Too many eyes, all different sizes, all moving and focusing independently. The barrier stretched further, and I heard Kensington curse quietly. They're trying to breach. This hasn't happened in 15 years, not since the last incident. Get the containment teams here now. The soldiers around us scattered, running toward vehicles and equipment, leaving me standing there with Kensington and maybe a dozen others who seemed to be in command positions. One of them, a woman in a lab coat, ran up with a tablet in her hands. Director, the energy readings are off the scale. They're pulling power from somewhere, but not from any of our systems. It's like they're tapping into something we can't measure. Can we shut them down? Kensington asked, his eyes never leaving the triangles. The woman shook her head. We've never been able to shut them down. We can only wait for them to finish whatever cycle they're going through and hope they go dormant again. How long? Last time it took 3 days. 47 people were exposed during that time. 31 developed symptoms. 22 had to be terminated. I stared at her. Terminated? You killed them? She finally looked at me, and I saw exhaustion in her eyes. They weren't people anymore by the time we terminated them. The exposure changes you, gets into your head and rewrites things. We tried to save the first few, put them in isolation, gave them every treatment we could think of. They just got worse. Started speaking in that language, started drawing those symbols everywhere, started trying to breach containment so they could get back to the triangles. Termination was the most merciful option we had left. The barrier on the nearest triangle stretched to its breaking point, and then it shattered. Not literally, but the liquid surface lost cohesion, and the shadow inside spilled out onto the concrete like oil. Except it wasn't oil. It was alive and moving with horrible purpose, flowing toward the nearest person, one of the soldiers who'd been too slow to evacuate. He screamed as the black liquid touched his boot, screamed louder as it began crawling up his leg, spreading across his uniform, reaching for exposed skin. Where it touched him, his flesh began to change, turning the same impossible black as the liquid. He clawed at his face, trying to remove his gas mask, and I realized with horror that the liquid had gotten inside somehow, was filling him from within, replacing his tissues with something else. Kensington pulled a sidearm from his belt and fired 3 times, center mass, but the soldier didn't fall. The bullets hit him. I saw the impacts, but he just stood there as the black liquid finished its work. His screams cut off abruptly, and he turned to face us. His eyes were gone, replaced by that same blue glow that had been on the triangle's surface. His mouth opened, but the voice that came out wasn't his. It was that same chorus of alien voices I'd heard through my radio, dozens of speakers using one damaged human vocal cord. Witness. You are the witness. You must see. You must know. The cycle approaches. The time is measured. You are chosen to carry knowledge. The soldier's body took a step toward me, arms outstretched, and I saw that his fingers had elongated, stretched into those cable-like appendages I'd seen inside the triangle. Kensington grabbed my arm and yanked me backward. Run! Get to the containment hangar now! I ran. Didn't think about it. Didn't question it. Just ran with Kensington and the others toward the nearest building, while behind us I could hear more screams, more sounds of transformation. I risked a glance back and wished I hadn't. The triangles were all opening now, all releasing their contents, and dozens of people were being caught by the black liquid, being changed, being taken over by whatever intelligence drove these things. We reached the hangar, and Kensington slammed his hand on a panel beside the door. Heavy steel shutters began descending, but they weren't fast enough. One of the transformed soldiers made it through the gap before it closed. His body contorted into shapes that should have broken bones, but didn't. He moved like a spider, using those elongated limbs to climb walls and ceiling, those glowing eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my bladder want to let go. Witness, you flew above us. You saw our vessels. Now you must understand our purpose. Kensington raised his weapon and fired, but the bullets passed right through the transformed soldier like he was smoke. The body fell to the ground, or rather, flowed to the ground, reforming into a puddle of black liquid that began spreading across the floor toward us. Containment protocols aren't working, Kensington said grimly. These things have been dormant so long we thought we understood them. We were wrong. The woman in the lab coat, whose name I still didn't know, pulled up something on her tablet. There's one option. The old protocol from 1957. We've never used it because the collateral damage would be massive, but it was designed specifically for a full breach scenario. How massive? Kensington asked. We'd have to evacuate the entire base and destroy the triangles with a tactical nuclear device. Minimum yield, but still enough to irradiate the whole area for decades. The fallout pattern suggests we'd have to evacuate towns as far as 50 miles away. Politically impossible. Kensington looked at the spreading black liquid, which had now reached the first row of equipment and was climbing up machinery, consuming it, incorporating it. Start the evacuation. I'll handle the politics after everyone's safe. How long until we can detonate? 4 hours minimum to evacuate all personnel and get the device in position. Then we have 4 hours to survive. Get everyone you can to the underground shelter. Use the old fallout bunker from the Cold War era. Those doors were built to withstand nuclear blasts. Maybe they'll hold against this too. The liquid had reached a computer terminal and flowed into it through the ventilation slots. The monitors flickered to life, displaying those impossible symbols, and I heard the voice coming from the speakers now. Witness, Mortis, you cannot run from knowledge, cannot unhear the truth. We are not invaders. We are custodians. We have always been here. We'll always be here. Kensington led us deeper into the hangar, toward a stairwell that descended into the earth. We passed laboratories and storage rooms, all of them showing signs of the base's true purpose. I saw aircraft I didn't recognize, technology that looked decades ahead of anything publicly available, and in one room, something that made me stop despite Kensington's urgency. There were bodies in containment tubes, dozens of them, and they weren't human. They were those same segmented forms I'd seen inside the triangles, preserved in some kind of clear fluid, with cables and monitoring equipment attached to every surface. You've had them this whole time, I said, stunned. You've been studying them. Not them, the woman in the lab coat said. These are empty. Whatever intelligence drives the triangles can move between bodies, between vessels. These shells are what's left when they abandon a form. We've been trying for 70 years to figure out how they work, how to communicate with them, how to stop them. We've failed at all three. We reached the shelter, a massive underground complex that must have cost billions to build. Hundreds of people were already there, scientists and soldiers and support staff, all looking terrified. The doors began to close behind us, 3 feet of reinforced steel sliding into place with hydraulic precision. But before they sealed completely, I saw one more thing that would haunt me forever. The black liquid had reached the stairwell, not flowing down like water, but moving with purpose, with intelligence, sending out tendrils that tasted the air and searched for prey. And riding at the front of that tide were the transformed soldiers, their bodies no longer even remotely human, rebuilt into something that could survive and thrive in whatever environment the triangles needed. The doors sealed with a boom that I felt in my chest, and we were locked in, safe for the moment, but trapped underground with no way to know what was happening on the surface. Kensington pulled out a radio, a different one from before, and spoke into it with the kind of authority that suggested he was talking to someone very important. This is Kensington at Groom Lake. We have a total containment failure. All surface personnel either evacuated or compromised. I am requesting authorization to implement Protocol Omega. Yes, sir. I understand the consequences. But if we don't stop this here, if even one of those things gets off the base— He listened for a moment, his face grim, then nodded. Understood. Omega is authorized. Initiating countdown now. 4 hours. He turned to address the room full of terrified people. Everyone listen up. In 4 hours, this facility will be destroyed by a tactical nuclear device. The surface base, the triangles, everything will be vaporized. We have evacuation vehicles standing by at the auxiliary exits to transport you to safe distance. You will all be debriefed and compensated for your service. What you've witnessed today is classified at the highest level. Violation of that classification will result in immediate arrest and prosecution. Are there any questions? One man raised his hand, his voice shaking. What about the people on the surface? The ones who were transformed? Kensington's expression didn't change. They're already gone. What's wearing their bodies isn't them anymore. We're doing them a mercy. The next 4 hours were the longest of my life. We sat in that shelter, listening to updates over the radio, hearing about the evacuation progress, about the tactical team positioning the nuclear device, about the spreading contamination zone on the surface. The triangles weren't just releasing their contents anymore. They were multiplying. Each transformed human was becoming a new triangle, their bodies restructuring into those impossible shapes, adding to the fleet. By the time the evacuation was complete, there were over 200 of them. Kensington pulled me aside about 30 minutes before detonation. You're a civilian. You weren't supposed to be here. That makes you a problem. But it also makes you an opportunity. An opportunity for what? I asked. The truth is going to come out eventually. These things have been dormant for decades, but whatever triggered this activation, it won't be the last time. We need people on the outside who know what's really out there. People who can spread the word in ways that sound crazy enough to be dismissed as conspiracy theories, but detailed enough that when the next incident happens, some people will be prepared. I stared at him. You want me to go public? You just said violation of classification would result in arrest. I said that for the others. For you, I'm saying something different. Go public. Tell your story. Make it sound as crazy and unbelievable as possible. Post it on conspiracy websites and forums. Let people call you crazy, but make sure the information is out there, buried in layers of ridicule and skepticism, so that when they need it, they can find it. Why? Because 70 years of secrecy hasn't protected us. It's just made us unprepared. The triangles are waking up, not just here, but at other sites around the world. We've had reports from Russia, China, Australia. All the same pattern. Activation, transformation, multiplication. We can't contain it forever. So maybe it's time to try a different approach. Maybe it's time people knew what's really out there. The detonation happened exactly on schedule. We felt it even underground, a tremor that shook the shelter and knocked equipment off tables. The lights flickered but held. When it was over, Kensington led a small team to the surface to assess the damage. I went with them, needing to see what had become of the place where my life had changed forever. The blast had turned the entire base into a crater of molten glass. Nothing remained of the buildings, the runways, the triangles. The heat had been intense enough to vaporize everything within a half-mile radius. But as we stood at the edge of that crater, looking down into the still-glowing destruction, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Symbols, etched into the glass, visible even through the heat distortion. The same impossible geometry I'd seen on the triangle's surfaces. They were still there, still transmitting, still waiting. 5 months later, I'm living in that motel outside Tonopah, writing this account, trying to get it all down before the headaches get worse. Because they're getting worse. Started about a week after I left Groom Lake. Just little ones at first, brief flashes of pain behind my eyes. But now they last for hours, and during the worst ones, I see things. The symbols, burning in my vision even when my eyes are closed, and I hear the voices, that alien chorus, still trying to communicate something I'm not equipped to understand. Kensington was wrong. I wasn't chosen to be a witness. I was chosen to be a carrier. The exposure didn't kill me, didn't transform me, but it did something. Left something inside my head that's growing, changing, preparing. I can feel it sometimes late at night, that presence that isn't me, looking out through my eyes at this world that it's been waiting so long to reclaim. I don't know how much time I have left before I'm not me anymore. Could be days, could be months. But I needed to get this written down first. Needed someone to know that they're real, that they're waking up, and that nothing we do is going to stop them. Because they were here first. This was their world long before it was ours. And they're very patient. If you're reading this, don't go looking for Area 51. Don't try to fly over it or break in or any of the stupid things people talk about online. Because they're watching now. The triangles are watching. And every person who gets close enough to see them, to really see them, becomes part of what's coming. Becomes another vector for the transformation. Kensington called it Protocol Omega, like it was the end. But I know better now. I understand what the voices have been trying to tell me all along. It's not the end. It's the beginning, the hatching, and we're the eggs. Thanks for watching.